Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Nikki Jovicic from LookUpStrata, and I'm very happy to welcome our panellists today. Joining us shortly, we have Bruce McKenzie from Sedgwick. Today, we're discussing WA defects and remedial works projects. When referring to legislation, Bruce will be specifically speaking about Western Australian legislation. Please feel free to share the recording with neighbours, council members, other staff members, or anyone you think will be interested in the session. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that the information contained in this session, including the discussions that arise from submitted questions, is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as legal advice. You should seek legal advice before acting on the information contained in this session. We'll be addressing Q&As later in the session, but first, Bruce has a presentation for you, Defects and Remedial Works Projects. So I'm delighted to introduce Bruce McKenzie from Sedgwick. Bruce has a 30 years experience in the building industry as a licensed building contractor and qualified supervisor on a wide variety of commercial projects. Bruce has been a recipient of multiple state building excellent awards and a national building award through Master Builders. Bruce is the current national manager for commercial services and major projects, building consulting division at Sedgwick. Bruce leads the commercial team of experts managing a wide variety of building projects nationally in the insurance and private sectors, including property damage, catastrophe, and large-scale remediation. He's also acted as an expert witness on numerous property damage and defect matters, including the most recent 2018-2019 litigation case for the infamous La Crosse Tower in Melbourne's Docklands. This followed Sedgwick's initial involvement in the 2014 combustible cladding fire. Welcome, Bruce, and I'll hand the session over to you now.
Thank you, Nikki. Nice introduction. I appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. What I want to run through this morning in this presentation, which I'll bring up on the screen in a moment, is a little bit about defects, just some typical examples, I guess, of defects we've come across or I've come across in my career, and then get on to a bit of what I call best practice. It's something that we use in our business. It's something I come across regularly, and it's something I've observed in the industry of what I consider is the best way to manage considerable defects or problems in strata buildings, which I'm sure everyone can attest to. They are a bit different to residential properties, commercial, or whatever else. Strata is a very unique industry, and it's something that we've really honed in on in the last few years, trying to sort of assist. So I shall bring up on my screen, hopefully it'll work okay.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, that looks great. Thanks.
I just confirm that that's up okay.
It is. Yeah, that looks really good.
Excellent. Okay. So the topic is obviously building defects and remediation. As Nikki pointed out, I've got over 30 years experience in the industry. I'm in a bit of a unique position where I've sat on what I call the contractor side for a number of years, and now I sit on what's considered the client side. So we do client side project management of all sorts of different things in the insurance sector, in the private sector, and I'm doing a lot of work with the Victorian government at the moment on their cladding program as well. So what I'd like to think is I've got a fairly neutral view on how things should be managed. I can look at it through the lens of a contractor, but also through the lens of a client-side project manager, and it helps to try and understand the issues from both sides and consider those appropriately. So just getting on with the session. So probably the question that's asked of me more often than not all the time is, why are defects increasing in modern properties? It's a typical question that comes up, and look, my explanation to that as best I can is really a few key points that I'll highlight now. So the demand in residential accommodation drive really in the industry off the plan sales. This has been going on for a few years now, and particularly in the last 10, 15 years. A lot of these properties that are going up, we see them go up regularly at lightning speed now compared to what the traditional methods were followed. Normally that's the reason behind that is driven by property development. It's driven by off the plan sales, as I mentioned, and the need to just get that complete get the owners occupied, get the sale underway, move on with the next project. So what it's done in the industry, generally speaking, has driven a new method of construction technology that, in my view, is not the desirable way to do it. There are shortcuts that are getting taken. I want to point out this is not all building contractors, it's only some. But certainly when some of those fundamental shortcuts are taken, it can cause significant issues down the track. Just coming on to some of the other points, design and construction, that's a model that's been used in the industry for a few years now. It is where quite often the builder might be also the developer and also the funder of the project. And so the normal level of governance that is applied across inspecting and checking along the way is somewhat diluted because of that, that relationship there, which can be considered potentially a conflict, I guess, in terms of delivering best practice at the end of the day. Another big problem in the industry too is labour shortages, and it has been apparent over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Traditionally, I think everybody's got recollections of the old traditional tradesmen and tradeswomen who were very passionate about their trades. They learnt the old school way of doing things. Unfortunately, the pressures of society today have diluted that away a bit, where we do have trades working now that are not as skilled as what they should be. They're under extreme pressure to complete projects in a quicker fashion. And again, it drives shortcuts, it drives problems in the industry. So that's just a few of my theories. Another one I'll just put up on the screen now is the evolution of property, generally speaking. So the image you can see there is a typical example of a unit block that we would have seen, say, in the 70s. What's fairly obvious with that building is it's a duplicated design layout from ground floor up to the top floor. And what I mean by that is the kitchen, the bathroom, all of the different rooms in those apartments are identical from the top to bottom. So the method of construction is relatively simple. And when it's put together, the likelihood of defects or problems forming are less because of that duplicated design. So the other point I'll make as well is, in a property like that, the original design of Australian standards, the Building Code of Australia, which is now called the National Construction Code, those documents cover pretty well on the details associated with a building like that. So generally speaking, if you want a detail on how a junction occurs between two floor levels or a bathroom, you could open up the codes and you could find what you needed in there, very, very black and white in terms of what is needed. What I'm highlighting there, just in that in the red there, is also the separation of the units. So typically in a strata building, units, it's usually obvious to see when you're standing on the ground and you look at the building where the separation is, which is associated with the fire compartments of the building, where that separation occurs between levels and between units. And that is critical in strata buildings, because obviously you need to have each compartment separated for that purpose of fire safety. If we now flip over to a modern style building, what's occurred over the years is obviously our appetite as users to have much more pleasing looking buildings. We're not satisfied with that building in the top left anymore. We want to see things that look better, aesthetically pleasing. There's lots of angles, there's lots of mixed use as well. One of the things we do in buildings these days is we more often than not put a cafe downstairs or a shop. What that immediately does is it creates a separation in the classification of the building. It's no longer just residential, it's mixed. So you do have to consider there that there's other factors, and that does influence design factors in the building. So all over, what generally occurs is the standards and codes that I referred to before are really, really challenged. Those codes that used to sort of spell out black and white how things need to be done, there's a grey area there, and it's much harder to control that. It comes down to performance solutions, which is a reference in the industry. And so what happens there, it's starting to become a little bit more personal preference of engineers, certifiers, and people who are involved in the process, as opposed to just following a rule book, which is had to have been expanded out a bit. So that's sort of some of the more, I guess, obvious reasons in my mind as to how the industry's evolved and how we're now looking at buildings that are challenged a lot more in the construction industry, given how they're built. So the next slides here, I'm just going to cover off. the cause categories. And basically I've come up with 4 different categories you'll see on the screen that are the major cause of defects on any property. And ordinarily it's one of these 4. So normally a design, and I can give some examples in the following slides of what constitutes each of these categories, but design, materials, workmanship and maintenance are the 4 general areas that something has gone wrong in one of those 4 to cause a defect to form. So as pointed out on the slide there, in design, omissions from design documents or even poor details that were designed in the first place. So in other words, the building really didn't have a hope if it was designed inadequately in the first place. The materials that are used, that greatly influences defects on buildings and whether those materials have failed themselves or whether in fact they were just inferior to begin with. So whether a material's been used that's of lesser quality than what should have been used, that's a lot of that occurs in the industry at the moment. Workmanship, improper installations, non-compliant to design or standards, that again seems to be very popular at the moment where the designs are not followed correctly. So whilst the design might be good, it's not been put together properly, hence it gives rise to issues and defects. And the last one is maintenance. As strata owners, most people are aware of maintenance requirements. And yes, it does contribute a lot to various issues in the industry. But no doubt the most common one, in my experience in 30 years in the industry, workmanship easily comes out on top. It's the failure to properly execute tasks and put it together properly that is contributing to some of these defects. It's unfortunate and it is a reflection on a lot of driving factors in the industry, but that's definitely the most popular trend at the moment. So on the first one, typical design defects, I'll give some examples here. Combustible cladding, I'm sure everybody's heard a lot about combustible cladding. That's a typical design issue. So obviously the material shouldn't have been put on the building and it contributes back to the design or even the design and construct builder. Incorrect hob design and step down, that is probably the most common design defect we come across anywhere in Australia, whether it be on the east coast or the west coast, is the step downs between the internal floor and the outside, which contributes to water leaks. And in strata properties, it's very, very common. Just general things like sealing, where there's not sealant in places. Again, that example on the right there is a gap from an aluminium window up until a steel lintel in a doorway, and it's contributed back to design where really the aluminium window should have been bigger and the gap should have been sealed better. Typical material defects, there's just some examples of the incorrect use. That's a particle board used in a wet area that's failed, and just typical cracking. Most of these photos are live photos I've come across in my career. So they're live examples of things that do go wrong regularly. And material failures could be anything from a lack of expansion joints in a building to building on proper foundations and many other causes. Workmanship, poor installations, that's a good photo, the one on the left there. I'll admit that is not something I did come across, but I did find that image and I find it amusing. But yeah, typical poor installations of many things, lack of sealing, lack of expansion joints. A lot of that could have been prevented by the actual materials being constructed properly in the first place and following a guideline where you do follow procedures to prevent these things from happening. Typical maintenance defects. I'm sure as strata owners, most people have come across a lot of these typical examples, but roofing maintenance is obviously a big one. We see this very, very regularly where the lack of maintenance on roofs can contribute to water buildup, water leaks, and that creates problems obviously for anything through to insurance claims and things where proper coverage is not afforded if maintenance is not undertaken on a regular basis. Repainting and mechanical plant servicing, typically on most new buildings, there's a maintenance plan in place. And generally, provided that's followed, most of these things can be prevented. So the big question, who's accountable? There's a couple of theories on who ultimately is to blame on many issues, but typically speaking, maintenance, the owners are responsible for that if it is proven it is a typical maintenance issue. But generally, for all of those other issues, the design, the materials, the workmanship, If it is within a builder warranty period, and in WA that is a 6-year statutory period, then generally speaking, it will be something that the builder will be liable for and can be pursued for through various avenues. Once you are outside of that warranty period, then it does become more difficult, and pursuing the original builder can be a little bit more complicated and difficult to do. So then it may fall back into a matter that has to be dealt with more at a strata level and amongst the strata committee. So I just wanted to cover off on just some essentials here. In considering going forward with any kind of defect work, no matter what it is, there's some key essentials that really have to be considered by owners before things start. I've seen a lot of failures happen, what I refer to as second time around. So, and what I call first time around is the building's constructed, and obviously there may be a defect that comes up, and the strata may have a second opportunity to fix that. And I can't emphasize enough getting that second opportunity right, and getting the correct measures in place so there's not going to be a third occurrence that you have to attend to something. Nobody wants that. It is very, very costly, but it can be prevented if you just take some simple measures, particularly on that second time around. So typically speaking, there's a few things I'll highlight here. When issues and defects do present, different strategies can be implemented. So firstly, determining whether it is maintenance or a defect. Existing warranties do need to be considered, so whether the builder is responsible or not. Immediate mitigation measures. So what's really important is to all owners, if you do see any kind of defect, one of the very first things you should always do is put in mitigation measures, and that is doing anything to prevent further damage. Often that is obviously notifying experts or getting tradesmen in to have a look at that, but anything you can do to prevent further damage is really critical. Early warning is essential as well, and I recall a property I looked at a couple of years ago in New South Wales where an elderly lady had been looking at a leak for a number of years. It turned into significant mould, significant problems. It escalated to quite a big level by the time we got a chance to look at it and start to give advice on how to fix it. But her response was she didn't want to bother anyone with it. And it's such a typical example, educating owners to give that early warning straight away, because it can prevent a lot of heartache and also can reduce the cost to repair significantly if something can be flagged. So moving on, legal is always a consideration as well. So particularly if a builder has, got a remaining warranty left on a property and you're not getting the responsiveness, obviously going down that pathway is an option as well. Properly identifying the defect is critical too. So it is getting experts in. And again, I can't emphasize enough getting the right qualified experts in first to help investigate and understand what is this issue before you get into any remedial work. I know for most owners, the typical response is you would straight away get a roofer or a plumber or a tradesperson out to give advice and rectify, but try considering, particularly if it's more significant, try considering getting an expert, an independent expert in, someone who's not necessarily going to fix the problem themselves, but can offer qualified legal or expert advice on what they think the actual problem is. Putting together a detailed scope of work is important as well. So making sure once that problem is identified, putting together an extremely clear and concise scope so that anyone who is going to be repairing it, whether they're tendering as part of a panel, whether it's a select contractor, you're very, very clear on what they need to do. So the 4 key essential considerations. The first one I've got written there, you need it to be all inclusive. What I mean by that is really, if a scope of work is written for argument's sake to fix a problem in a building, it could be a balcony that's leaking and you want a new membrane put in to stop that leaking or whatever it is, you really want that scope of work to be all inclusive. And that is the balustrade might need to be removed before the tiles are pulled up, before the membrane goes down. So it clearly outlines the workflow of what's got to happen. So by the time a contractor prices that, it's all inclusive. The most expensive thing you can ever come across in the building industry is variations to a current building contract. So once you sign that builder, as an owner, you're captive, you really don't have a lot of choices. And unexpected things do come up, and that scope of work is not all inclusive, can be very, very expensive to have to navigate through those extra things and pay those extra costs to a contractor that might be already established on site. So that can be prevented by making sure that a lot of investigation work goes into that all-inclusive to begin with. Conformance is the next one. So you need it to conform with the current statutory requirements. Again, this is a really, really common one that I see a lot, where repairs have done, and in some instances they may have been done reasonably, but they don't necessarily conform. So it is really, really important that that scope or the extent of work that's going to be done complies with the current Australian standards. And to give you some examples, even though a contractor may have done work, they may have bent the rules a bit and gone outside the standards a little bit. It's not leaking anymore, but generally it's okay. It lasts for a couple of years, another problem comes up. You lodge an insurance claim. Generally speaking, what can occur is the insurers will investigate, and if they determine that work's been done not in accordance properly with the standard, it can cause issue with coverage on your insurance, as an example. So aside from the fact the standards and codes in Australia, they've been put together for a good reason, and that is their best practice. They're there to protect you as owners and anyone in the industry. So it's really, really important that that is undertaken that way. And the other big one as well is warranties. You want warranties for the work that's been done. And generally, if work is not done in accordance with a standard or code, it can impact the warranty that you would be looking for. So that's my next headline is warranties and guarantees. As owners, again, you are going to expect a warranty at the end of the day. And I made mention in the article I put together for LookUpStrata about casting your mind forward to the end of the process. Try and, before you start on any defect journey, go to the end first and say to yourself, what is it I want at this point in time when it's all finished and done? And some of those things you want, typically, yes, you're going to want it repaired and fixed and no problems, but you do want a warranty. You want some assurance at that point in time that you can recall that contractor back and get them to look at things if it fails a second time or a third time over. So warranties are essential. And when you are reviewing building quotes or anything that's coming in, pay particular attention to what kind of warranty that a contractor might offer on anything that's going to be done. Typically, that can also come down to even materials as well, where it could be that they're offering, for example, a different kind of membrane that's half the cost of that commercial membrane you were talking about. But looking at the fine print, the warranty is very limited. It might only be a couple of years as opposed to 10 years, for an example. So those factors have got to be weighed up as to what you're going to want at the end of the day. And most owners looking at it at the end of the journey are not going to want to revisit something in 2 years' time. It's just not where people want to go. So it's really important to factor things like that in. The last one I've got written there is that you need to ensure that the extent and the cost are balanced with the benefits. So that fits together a little bit with the statement I just made before about that membrane. And look, every owner, I fully accept, is challenged every day with cost versus performance of a product or what they may have or what they may be able to afford at the time. It's a really tricky road, and it's very difficult to sometimes make decisions on, particularly if you do have a much more economical solution in front of you that may look good at face value. Again, I emphasize getting experts involved to help you analyze what that really means is really crucial, and it does really help because once you do start to get in and you peel the layers back and you understand what a cheap quote really means, the value might not necessarily be sitting there. There could be some gaping holes there that put you exposed as owners where it's actually not really representing the value you really first thought it would. And a lot of that comes back to some of those other points there, which is, you know, does the quote include everything that you really wanted it to? Does it actually conform? Has it got a warranty? They're typical things that come up on a repeated basis. We see this all the time. And quite often that lowball quote you get has obviously some disadvantages in going down that path. So now that's not to say that, you know, there are occasions where you know, the competitive nature of the industry might drive a cheaper price to come in. It might be okay. But as long as you follow a pathway of due diligence and you look into those things, you need that assurance as an owner that you're not going to start going down a pathway where you've got to redo this problem a third time over. It's just, I can't emphasize enough the emotion that usually gets attached to that, and particularly when we're bought in, is significant. And yeah, it's really not where anyone wants to be. So I'll stop sharing now. That's pretty much that I've covered off on what I wanted to, just, I guess, explaining more at a higher level. There's lots I can talk to about, obviously, engagement of contractors or best practice and that sort of thing. But I think probably to move the session on, I'm happy to sort of jump in the Q&A now, and it might just sort of tease out some of those things as we go.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bruce. That was really great. Really good practical information in there for all of the different stakeholders that are dealing with those sort of issues in their buildings. So thank you very much for that. Now we have got some really good questions that have come in. We've had a couple that have just popped into chat as well while we've been speaking. If anyone else out there has a question that they'd like to pop in there, just please feel free to do that, and we'll do what we can to get to those questions as we move through the rest of the session. Okay, so the first one we had was from Ange Bruce. We have had a 10-year maintenance plan done for our Strata complex that was built in 1971 and requires major work to the roof and external walls. How do we choose and engage tradesmen, noting quotes received differ greatly? How do we ensure works are carried out and finalised to standard? Our roof and wall works are estimated to cost approximately $200,000 in total. Should we engage a project manager, and if so, how? Should we obtain legal advice, and how have a contract drawn up for the major works? And what's the best practice, good governance in these situations?
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Okay, this is probably what I would call a pretty typical question, and it's a really good one. I think it covers off on a few good things there. First thing I want to emphasise is project managers, and again, our business does project management, and there's a lot of others that do it too. And I'm not here to try and encourage you to go in any particular direction. What I want to encourage people, but is selecting experts in their required field when it's needed. I can't emphasise enough, it is so important to get experts involved, because it is that, you know, insurance that you need moving forward. So when you look at a value of around $200,000, because a lot of these things you've got to put in proportion. If you've got a $20,000 problem on your building, engaging a project manager, I would say probably wouldn't add enough value in comparison to the spend that you're about to go down. You might be able to get a smaller bit of advice from experts, but getting a project manager to manage something like that may be a little bit disproportional. For the value of $200,000, yes, I think a project manager could add value to that. I definitely think you're getting up into that area of cost where certainly the cost benefit weighs in, and you would get some benefit out of that. When you're talking particularly about engaging tradesmen and looking at some of the things like roofing or walling or wherever you've got problems, one of the challenges you can come across is should I be picking a roofer to do this, or should I be picking a builder who would engage a roofer to do that? And if I picked a builder, that might attract a slightly higher cost, like a premium or a margin the builder might add, or it would be cheaper to go to a for instance, a roofer. What you really need to consider first and foremost is the warranty you want at the end of the day. And you really want to be able to go to one individual, and whether it's a problem associated with the roof, the wall, or anything else, you just want one person to deal with it and marry together where the problem is and rectify that. So something of that value, I would be recommending going towards a builder who, in this instance, if there's a few larger things need to be done, they could engage a roofer underneath their own umbrella. But they could also engage any other experts if needed. You know, wall works, I've noted there. I'm not exactly sure what would be involved there, but it could involve anything from, you know, electrical to cladding to a whole bunch of different trades. So getting a builder involved is your best security blanket, is probably the way I could put it. So in answer to the first question, yes, I think engaging a project manager would help to guide you down that pathway. Some of the things that need to be teased out is again, a scope of work. What you want that project manager or that expert to do is to put together a clear and concise scope of what you need done, so anybody who prices that for you are pricing on exactly the same thing. Apples for apples, I think, is the good old term, because that's what you need to be able to make a fair comparison and help you choose. The second question, should we obtain legal advice and have a contract drawn up? Absolutely, a contract should be drawn up in any instance. I can't emphasise that enough either. That's crucial. Generally speaking, when a project manager is involved, they will introduce a contract, so they will assist in setting a contract up. But ordinarily, I would still recommend getting legal advice, and that would just be review of the contract once it's drafted. And a legal advice, good legal advice, should be able to go through that and tell you any weaknesses in that contract, exposures, anything that doesn't seem to sit right. But generally speaking, a good project manager will be able to put their knowledge to that contract, go through it and weed out anything that they consider to be an exposure to the owners corporation. What is best practice, good governance in these situations? Well, point number 2 is the big highlight one for me, having a contract in place. That is crucial. But look, going forward, again, having a comprehensive scope of work. So it's essentially the rule book is drawn up and everybody knows what it is that the owners expect and what they want at the end of the day. Usually following some kind of a procurement process. So the value of $200,000 in my mind absolutely warrants getting 3 or 4 contractors to tender on that. And so you can test the market, you can compare, you can see whether there's fair value there. Again, making sure absolutely that they're following the same scope of work, so the information you're getting back is fair and reasonable and equal. And then engagement and starting up that building contract, again, is where a project manager might be able to add value, and that is checking the work as it's done and when it's complete. That's crucial as well. So whilst you get a quote and it tells you you're going to get X, Y, Z, you want to know at the end of the day, did I get that or did I get something different? And that really expensive membrane or roof sheeting that I picked, and we all, as a strata, we picked it together because we knew we'd get an extra 10 years warranty because it was a much better quality material. At the end of the day, was that actually put on your building, and what evidence do you have of that? So it's having that project manager or expert or someone there to give you a bit of assurance at the end of the day, you've got what you paid for. That's what I asked for. That's what I got. My warranty is in order now. I can move forward, and I've got a guarantee from the builder. So that's probably the best way I can answer that, I guess, in terms of best practice.
Bruce, can I add to that? I fully endorse everything that you just said, because I often say to council of owners that when I sit on my council of owner, I think of my building as an asset, right? And I have a $70 million asset. I'm unlikely to own a $70 million asset again in my life. So when I sit on the council of owners, I put my business hat on and I think, what's the best thing for this building? Often councils of owners try and drive down the cost as if that's actually a good thing. Driving down the cost is not a good thing, right? Sometimes you have to pay for quality, but when you pay for quality, then you actually extend the life of your building. So with maintenance, you wouldn't drive a car for 20 years without doing maintenance. So don't expect to live in an apartment for 20 years and not do maintenance.
Thanks so much for the response, Bruce, and thanks for the additional information there, Sam, too. That was great. All right, we might move on to the next one. This one was from Natalie. I live in a small strata of 4 units that was built in 1987. There are substantial cracks appearing in the front retaining walls split between the visitors' car park and 1 unit's courtyard. As a landscape architect with some landscape construction knowledge, it looks as if the wall is just a single brick wall. Part of this conclusion is supported by the fact that at the back was retained using fence sheets that were recently replaced. In both instances, over 1 metre of soil along 20 metres is being held back. Council no longer has records of the plans. Insurance says they will no longer cover, or they will not cover this. No one wants to spend any more on maintenance or even agree to getting an engineer's report. I have no support from other lot owners or council of owners. What can be done?
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Look, that's a tricky one, obviously, and not getting support from other owners is problematic in itself, and it's probably not something I can give advice in terms of how you would navigate that. What I would say on this one, I think, what do we say, 1987. So it's well over 30 years old, this property. You're getting cracks now in a wall. My first opinion on that is that there has to be some kind of change of event that is causing those cracks. Something's changed, because otherwise this would have occurred 10, 15 years ago. Some of those changes that can occur, the first typical thing with retaining walls is things like trees. Obviously, as they get bigger and the root systems develop, they can impact, foundations and things on retaining walls. Could have been some sort of weather event, or I'm not sure of the actual property, but whether there's been, subsoil water conditions or something that's occurred. Really, when you're talking about structural matters like this of a retaining wall, and I acknowledge that it doesn't appear the wall is significantly high, but it's long. But nonetheless, really the only way to get to the bottom is a forensic engineer. So that's getting someone with that background to look at it, do an assessment on the wall. That may extend off into things like geotechnical. They may have to just, check the soil and see if there's any movement or reasons. But again, in my experience, trees have a lot to answer for with these sorts of issues. They are inherently normally present, and quite often it could be the tree well across the neighbour's property somewhere else that the root system has made its way over. So really a forensic engineer would be the way to go with that. Given the age of the property, I think any sort of recovery through original builder design, construction, anything like that is obviously not an option for you, unfortunately. So I think in this one, whether it is, you do have to fund the cost for that forensic engineer in the first place to help lay your case down as to how significant that problem is or not, would be a start point. And that document will carry a fairly good amount of weight, I think, moving into that next conversation, even with the council, where you could talk along the lines of the severity of it and whether within, your strata arrangement that would permit you to move forward and have a bit more owner accountability once that's discovered.
Okay, that's great. And then Sam, did you want to just address the, Bruce mentioned about sort of trying to get some support from the Council of Owners, and would you like to address that part of the question? Because I think you probably got something to say about that too.
You can always call me to come out. So, darling, I deal with lots of difficult Council of Owners, and I attend lots of AGMs, and the beauty about my kind of like tag as being the Aaron Brockovich of apartments is I actually can deal up the delivery in a way that makes people realise that sometimes, inaction is not the best action. So in this situation, you've got to ask yourself, what would be the impact if that wall falls over? So it's more a crisis management than it is actually dealing with the crack. I agree that a forensic engineer definitely is the way to go, but at the end of the day, if that wall fails, whose car might, for example, be impacted, and then insurance won't cover that car because, of course, you actually haven't dealt with the wall. So yeah, but certainly you can reach out to me. I'm happy to come and talk to your other Council of Owners or other members.
Okay, thank you. That's great. All right, we had a question come in from Nick to do with cladding, Bruce. So with cladding, what is your recommended source of information to determine what product has actually been used? Oh, you're just on mute. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Okay,
I'm assuming, are we talking about combustible cladding here, or it probably doesn't?
I think it might be.
Yeah.
Nick, I think Nick's still in the session. If you wanted to just pop up, Nick, just to confirm that it is combustible cladding, but I think we can assume that that's what he's speaking about.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in terms of
any type of cladding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Look, obviously combustible cladding is quite a significant feature at the moment in Australia and around the world in terms of what's happening. There's all sorts of various means of identifying what is on your building. And I'm presuming in this instance, there might be, I guess, some suspicion or concern about what's there. And Nick, you may want to know, what is the material. Certainly, in most instances, there's no real proper way of determining what cladding is on a building other than doing what we refer to as exploratory work or destructive work. What that is, I don't like using the word destructive because, but it is taking a sample from a building. So it is about taking a core sample out of the building and being able to look at and get that core sample tested. And then that will determine whether the material is actually compliant, combustible or not. And that's the beginning of the whole journey, is starting with that testing. That's where it all sort of commences. One of the biggest problems in the industry with this cladding debacle that's occurred is that you would expect you'd be able to pull out some construction documents and have a look at the documents themselves as to whether, what particular cladding was specified in the first place by the architect, or even delivery dockets, what was delivered and put on the building. I can categorically tell you that information is inherently unreliable because of this period of time we've been through, where quite often builders don't follow the original design, or a developer may put pressure on a builder to get it finished quicker and buy a cheaper material or whatever. The only real way to understand what's on the building is to get that tested. So if it's, for instance, not combustible cladding or anything else, you'd be pulling off a portion of that, looking for markings and things on the back of the cladding. Normally when we do that, we'll do it in a discrete location in the building. We won't do it on the front facade or anything. We'll find somewhere where you can do it and test that just to see where that's going. But yeah, look, I saw your question pop up before. There's pressure from insurers at the moment. They are paranoid. They are asking owners to please explain, do you have a building that has got combustible cladding? Pretty unfair question in my view, because most owners really don't know. But if you are concerned at all, yeah, there are avenues to get tests done where it at least gives you some peace of mind as to whether a material on the building is flammable or not, and then that would then start a journey down a pathway of remediation if that was the case.
Okay, and then Nick's just popped a question in there. Any idea of the costs involved, or is that just on a case-by-case basis, Bruce?
Yeah, look, it's on a case-by-case basis. I could take that offline and work, but ordinarily it's going to depend on the building. Look, another important one I'll add into this, and depending on the size of the building you're talking about, but the other issue we've found with combustible cladding on a lot of buildings is we'll do a test in a particular place on a building and we'll determine that might not be combustible, but we'll go around the corner and do another test and it's a completely different product and it is combustible. So depending on the size of the building, sometimes there has to be a series of samples taken. And again, in the industry, there's lots of different things that have occurred, but sometimes a builder might get 3/4 of the way through, they run out of materials, they urgently want to get it finished, they ring around, they try and find where they can get something. Somebody's got a material and they'll say, it'll be fine, just put it on. And it turned out it was combustible. So it might have been a mixed use of materials through whatever reasons. So quite often, yeah, it does result in doing multiple tests, not just one.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now we've got another one here. I think we might have touched on this during the presentation, but I'm not sure if you wanted to expand on it a little bit more, but it's coming from Manny. I'm an owner in a relatively new apartment building in Perth. I've seen lots of news about strata owners in Sydney being affected by defects in their buildings. Is this the same in WA? What are the warranty periods for WA apartments and what should we be watching out for?
Yeah, good question.
Speak to this, if that's okay. Yes, unfortunately, our research from 2021, which spoke to 3,600 people, shows that there's still about 52% of apartment owners with defects in WA. Predominantly, that's water penetration from outside, water penetration from inside, structural cracking, plumbing defects, the like. If your builder is still around, you have 6 years post the 12 months defect liability period. If your builder is not around, such as Jackson, Pindan, Pizarros, then the Australian Apartment Advocacy is calling for an apartment recreation fund. We've had support from Minister Sanderson for that, which is where we actually have the government lend money to the strata company to actually repair the defect, and then a caveat's placed over the apartment so that when the apartment's sold, the actual refund or the payment of the apartment loan is paid back. So it depends if your builder's still around. If he's not, then please contact me. If he is, then I'll hand over to Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I think you've covered that pretty well. I mean, look, the baseline is 6 years. That's the statutory warranty period for any of these. And, the construction contracts that are signed up and the nature of whatever the problem is may determine whether there's any extension on that 6 years. For argument's sake, the construction contract might have said the membrane to your balconies has a 15-year warranty, for instance. So just because your 6 years is expired, don't automatically assume that you may not have any coverage. There's a lot more exploration that can be done after that in understanding even the original building contract and what was committed to and those sorts of things. So, and it is not uncommon for people, if this is a relatively new building, there's many materials out there that do have 10, 15 year warranties on them. So it's a good idea to try and tease those out, understand what are those warranties and those materials, and are they a contributing factor to whatever the problem is that's coming up.
We have an education kit, and in that education kit, one of the booklets talks about defects and what are defects and what aren't defects. And it also, the last book in our kit talks about how your rights are protected. So if you haven't downloaded our education kit, please go to our website, waaa.net.au, and download that education kit. That will give you more information.
Okay, thanks, Bruce and Sam. Now we've got one that's a little bit off topic because it's more to do with improvements rather than defects. But in a group of 8 single-storey strata dwellings, one owner wishes to install around 18 solar panels, and his roof is common property. How do we get an infrastructure contract drawn up, and how do we indemnify ourselves against future claims arising from loss or damage caused by the installation or its future removal? Would it be reasonable to request certification from a structural engineer that the roof can hold the weight with no potential for the installation to cause damage? The proposed size of the installation would cover most of the roof.
Yeah, look, I mean, Sam, you may be able to answer some of that one, but certainly I would have to emphasise getting a structural engineer in any instance when you are putting that sort of load on a roof. People do have to understand that a lot of buildings, particularly modern day buildings, are built and designed pretty closely to what the design tolerances are. In other words, they're not over-designed by 20, 30, 40% of what the standards ask for. Sometimes it's only a small amount over. So what that means is if you impose a load on a roof, a balcony or anything like that, is significant, it can impact things structurally. So definitely would recommend getting structural advice on that one.
I thought
Right,
that was a very
Sam, did you want to
question. Yeah, I thought it was a very impressive question. That was well thought out, that was well considered, and I agree with Bruce. Because at the end of the day, when you're living within a community, you have to be considerate of your neighbours, right? And you can't go and whack in 18 solar panels and think it's not going to impact everybody else. So Bruce is completely right. Get a structural engineer out and just make sure that you're capable of actually having that protected. Sorry, there's fire brigade going past. That you're protected, and also then you may actually want to look at a different insurance policy for those solar panels on top of what you actually have as your common property too.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one more, which I think there's actually 2, sorry, I'll jump to one quickly that came in during chat. Is there an easy way to obtain a copy of the builder's indemnity insurance policy?
Oh, look, I think just requesting that, obviously, but, what we do, we follow a fairly strict set of guidelines in any tendering. And if we ask a builder or a series of builders to put a price together on a project, what we issue to those builders is what we refer to as tender schedules. And those tender schedules, we request detail from that builder. So naturally, a builder's price is a consideration, but we also want to know, obviously, their insurance. So we want to see copies of that, their licensing and qualifications. Often we'll put on there also detail about previous experience or references, because they're key things really that if you are going to make a decision to go with a builder or a contractor, whoever you're going to go with, you really want to know a bit more about it. But absolutely, insurance is critical, and we would never progress with any contractor without viewing a copy of that. And I would suggest if there's pushback in getting that sort of information, that would be cause for concern immediately anyway.
Sam, did you have anything to add to that one, or happy to leave that?
I concur. And
okay.
You can check to see if they've been dodgy as well. So it might be worth doing an ASIC search of them to see if maybe they've operated previous companies where they Phoenix, right? The last thing you want to do is have a company do the work for you. They give you the insurance policy, but then they're not around next week, right? So do that due diligence as well.
Okay, great. And we've just had a question come in from Headley saying, given that the owners are not experts on all of this, chances are the first person contacted after the potential defect is found could be the strata manager in many cases. What or can owners expect the manager to provide guidance to put the COO on the right track?
Okay, look, I guess from my perspective as a technical expert, what we would normally expect is that getting the right technical experts involved first up, I think, and that's the key. Again, that's the key to all of these things. If it's a small issue, like I'll give an example, I guess, you know, a burst pipe or some sort of water issue, is it reasonable to get an expert involved, or is it a simple fix by a plumber that you can get on with? Everything needs to be put in proportion, and something like that, yes, I agree, you wouldn't necessarily need to get an expert involved. But if it's something that's happened multiple times over, or it's a significant issue, then definitely I would be getting someone in, because you really need to understand if there's any other connected issues to that. It might not be isolated. There could be 2 or 3 things that are all linked together. And unless they're all fixed, you may not actually properly rectify the problem. So that's certainly what I'd be looking for.
Okay, great. And Sam?
Just quickly, I had a recent situation where a lady had water penetration within her apartment, and it was in the East Coast. And the developer told her it was because it was a south-facing apartment in Melbourne, which was total BS, let's be honest. We had a specialist come in and look at what was going on, and he found water membrane failure throughout the apartment and also the complex. That gave me incredible strength then to go back to that developer and not only demand that he actually take action against the individual apartment, but it also then catalyzed the body corporate to go ahead and actually then engage that inspector to look at the whole building. So, you know, you do need a specialist. Like, these are specialist areas, right? That's why when I did the education kit, I formed a working group of 13 people who dealt with water membrane, cladding, you know, the whole works, because, you know, we're not specialists in that area unless you have been trained in that area. And that's why you need to bring in those people. And it does cost money. But you know what? The ability of actually bringing in a specialist and getting the right report means that if you go to SAT, or if you go to, you know, someone like Dr. Aman Zuhar or someone like that, you've got the evidence.
Okay, great. Great information. Thanks, Sam. All right, well, I think that just about brings us to the end of the session. We're just about up on our hour. So if you did submit a question and we ran out of time before addressing it, please feel free to jump onto the LookUpStrata site. We've got an Ask a Strata question page. You can submit the question that way, and we'll certainly get that dealt with for you. Now, always at the end of the session, we like to ask our guests to share any news or something exciting that's happening within their industry. So I'll jump to you, Bruce, if you've got something to share with us that you'd like to let our listeners know about before you go.
Sorry, on mute again. Look, I think what's encouraging in most states at the moment, just from my perspective, is increased activity from the building regulators, and that there is things are on the improve in the industry. So while I did paint a bit of a bleak picture, I guess, on how the industry's gone off on a trajectory of you know, a not desirable path and defects and things are improving. I know there's a lot of activity in states like New South Wales, Victoria, and even WA for that matter, in I guess what we call reform in the industry, which is upskilling trades, builders, and starting to really clamp down on these things. So I guess my message is, and it is encouraging, that the tides are turning. We are heading down a better pathway now. So, and yeah, I'm remaining vigilant and trying to encourage best practice myself. So that's probably what's encouraging for me at the moment. Thanks, Nikki.
Excellent. That sounds great. And yeah, we're always trying to get the message out there, obviously, for people and increasing that education. But Sam, you do a wonderful job with the advocacy across Australia, both in WA apartment advocacy and the Australian apartment advocacy. So thank you very much for your efforts there as well.
That's great. And I appreciate today's session. I have kind of like bombarded it. I feel like I've done the photo bomb thing, but I appreciate yours and also Bruce's consideration of that. So thank you, guys.
No, that's wonderful. It's great to have the different viewpoints, and you're both coming from it from a different area. So yeah, it's really good to have that extra feedback. So thank you for jumping in and helping out there. Okay, so before we go, I'd just like to say a really big thank you to both of you, Bruce and Sam, for jumping on today and sharing your valuable information and that valuable time that you've got with us. And thank you to everyone else who joined us. We hope to see you at one of our regular events in the future, either online or, yeah, as I said to you, we'll be appearing in person in the end of October and beginning of November at those two events. So please say hi, and yeah, we'll see you soon at another event. Thank you so much.